What if I told you that the biggest mistake you're making isn't giving too little, but giving too much? That the exhaustion, the frustration, the quiet resentment you feel, it's not because you lack kindness, but because you're giving in the wrong places. There's a hard truth in Buddhist wisdom. Giving without wisdom leads to suffering. Some people will take all you offer and still expect more. And if you don't learn when to stop, you won't just lose energy, you'll lose yourself. This video is about breaking free from that cycle. By the end, you'll understand why some people never appreciate what you do, how to protect your peace without guilt, and most importantly, how to reclaim your joy. But here's the catch. If you skip ahead, you'll miss the most important lesson. So stay with me until the end, and let's dive deep into the wisdom that can truly change your life. And if this resonates with you, subscribe now, because this journey of wisdom is just beginning. The afternoon sun filters through the branches of an ancient Bodhi tree, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. A lone figure sits in the garden, cradling a cup of tea between their palms, feeling the warmth spread through their fingers. The air is thick with the scent of blooming jasmine, and for a fleeting moment, there is peace. Then, the phone rings. A familiar name flashes on the screen. They hesitate. This has happened before. Many times. They know what's coming next. The voice on the other end will be warm at first, laced with affection. But within minutes, it will twist into something else. A request, a demand, an expectation. The person calling will remind them of all the things they have done in the past, the favors exchanged, the unspoken debts of obligation. And if they dare to refuse, the shift will be swift. Guilt, accusation, a heavy sigh, the kind meant to weigh on the heart, to make them feel selfish for even thinking of their own needs. There was a time when they would have answered, when they would have said yes, even before hearing the full request, when they would have believed that being a good person meant never saying no. But today they let the phone ring. There is a story in Buddhist teachings about a merchant and a monkey. Every morning, the merchant would walk through the marketplace, and each day, he would toss a small coin to a monkey who sat near the temple gates. It was a harmless act of generosity, something that made the monkey happy and the merchant feel kind. But over time, the monkey began to expect the coin. And when one day, distracted by his thoughts, the merchant forgot, the monkey screeched in anger. The next day, when the merchant still did not give a coin, the monkey grew violent, yanking at his robe, baring its teeth. What had started as a simple act of kindness had become an expectation, then a demand, then an entitlement. Manipulators work in much the same way. First, it's small. A favor here, a request there. You feel kind, helpful, even noble for offering your time, your energy, your resources. But over time, their gratitude fades. The requests increase. And soon, your willingness is no longer seen as generosity, but as duty. There was once a woman, let's call her May, who spent her entire life taking care of everyone around her. Her children, her friends, even her neighbors. If someone needed something, May was the first to offer. If a problem arose, May would fix it. And in the beginning, it made her feel good to be needed, to be the one everyone could count on. But as the years passed, something shifted. The requests grew larger, more frequent, and when she finally started to feel exhausted, when she needed help herself, she realized something heartbreaking. She had surrounded herself with people who only knew how to take. And the moment she stopped giving, the warmth in their voices turned cold. Buddhism teaches that true compassion is not the same as self-sacrifice. We often think that to be kind means to give endlessly, to never turn someone away, to always be available. But true compassion, real, balanced compassion, includes ourselves. It is not selfish to say no. It is not unkind to protect your own peace. In fact, setting boundaries is an act of kindness, not just for yourself, but for others. When we allow someone to manipulate us, when we give beyond our limits, beyond what is fair, we do not help them grow. Instead, we reinforce their dependency, their entitlement, their pattern of taking without gratitude. So what do you do when faced with a manipulator? How do you protect your peace without falling into guilt or resentment? First, learn the art of the gentle no. You do not need to explain yourself. You do not owe them a justification. A simple "I understand, but I'm not able to help this time" is enough. Second, recognize emotional traps for what they are. If someone tries to guilt you by saying, "After everything I've done for you," remember, true generosity does not come with a price tag. And finally, ask yourself a simple question. Does this relationship nourish me, or does it drain me? If every interaction with someone leaves you feeling exhausted, anxious, or resentful, it is a sign that something is deeply imbalanced. Relationships, true, meaningful relationships, should be built on mutual respect, not obligation. The tea has gone cold now, but the elder sitting in the garden does not mind. The phone has stopped ringing. The world is quiet again. They take a deep breath, inhaling the crisp air, letting it fill their lungs before exhaling slowly. Somewhere in the distance, a temple bell chimes, a gentle reminder that peace is not something we find. It is something we choose. And today they have chosen it. There's something almost sacred about a well-told story, a memory shared between friends, a quiet conversation over tea, a moment when words hold space between two souls. It's in these moments that we feel truly connected. But have you ever started to tell a story, one that meant something to you, only for someone to hijack it mid-sentence? You're just getting to the heart of it, the part that makes you smile, that stirs something deep inside. And then, before you even finish, they cut in. Suddenly, the moment is no longer about you. It's about them. At first, you let it slide. Maybe they didn't realize. Maybe they were just excited. But then it happens again. And again. You start to notice a pattern. Their voice always seems to be the loudest in the room. Their stories always take center stage. And when they do ask how you're doing, it's not really a question. It's a polite pause before they launch into their next monologue. There's an old Zen story about a student who visited a revered master seeking wisdom. The master, noticing the student's arrogance, invited him for tea. He began to pour, and as the cup filled to the brim, he kept pouring, the tea spilling over. Alarmed, the student finally exclaimed, "Master, the cup is full. No more will go in." The master smiled. "Like this cup, you are full of your own thoughts and words. Until you empty yourself, no wisdom can enter." Self-absorbed people are like that overflowing cup. There's no space for anyone else. They don't always mean harm, but they are consumed by their own narratives. They see conversations as a stage, not as an exchange. And over time, being around them feels less like companionship and more like being an audience. A friend once told me about her father, an old man who had lived a full life, filled with stories worth telling. He had grown up in a different time, seen things that younger generations could only read about in history books. He had wisdom, real, hard-earned wisdom. But whenever he sat at the dinner table, he found himself surrounded by people who never truly listened. His children were too busy scrolling through their phones. His friends were too eager to talk about their own lives. Even when he spoke, it felt like his words were slipping through cracks in the conversation, unheard and unnoticed. One evening, after yet another dinner where no one had really listened, he pushed back his chair, left the table and stepped outside. He sat on the porch, watching the night settle in, and realized something painful. He had spent his whole life wanting to be a part of something. But now, in the company of others, he had never felt more alone. The Buddha once said, "When words are both true and kind, they can change the world." But how often do we truly listen? Not just nod along, waiting for our turn to speak. Not just half listen while our mind races ahead to what we want to say next. But actually listen. A real conversation is like pouring 2 cups of water. It's a balance, give and take. If one person is always pouring and the other never refills, one cup remains full while the other runs dry. And yet, we are taught to be polite, to sit quietly, to let people talk, to tolerate those who talk over us, who make every moment about themselves. But there is a difference between being kind and being invisible. If you find yourself constantly surrounded by people who don't listen, it is not selfish to step away. It is not unkind to choose solitude over feeling unheard. There is a peace that comes with knowing you don't have to fight to be seen, that you don't have to raise your voice to be valued. Imagine a small gathering where everyone leans in, truly present, where stories are exchanged, not stolen, where laughter flows, but so does silence, the kind of silence that says, I hear you, I see you. That is the kind of company you deserve. And if you have to sit alone on a quiet porch, sipping tea, listening to the wind in the trees, at least you know, here in this space you are heard. The first time someone told me I wasn't good enough, I laughed. I was just a kid then, and I thought it was a joke. But when the same words came again, and again from different people in different forms, I stopped laughing. Maybe you felt it too. That sting of words wrapped in concern. I'm just trying to help. You know, you really should. Have you ever considered? The phrases seem harmless, like a drop of water on stone. But over time, as the drops continue to fall, the stone begins to wear down. Imagine a sculptor working on a piece of art, carefully shaping it, smoothing the edges, breathing life into something only he can see. Each stroke of his chisel is deliberate, filled with purpose. But every day someone walks by. That's not right. You should change that. It doesn't look quite right to me. First, he shrugs it off. But then doubt starts creeping in. He hesitates before making the next cut. He second-guesses his instincts. The masterpiece he once envisioned begins to fade beneath the weight of their voices. This is what a constant critic does to your soul. There was a woman I knew. Let's call her Lynn. She was in her 70s, wise and kind. But if you looked closely, you could see the hesitation in her eyes before she spoke. It was as if she had spent a lifetime being interrupted, questioned, made to feel that her words had to be perfect before she could say them. One evening, we sat in her small garden, the air filled with the soft hum of cicadas. She was tending to a bonsai tree, her fingers carefully adjusting its tiny branches. "Do you know why I love these trees?" she asked, without looking up. "Because they grow despite the cutting." She told me about her younger years, how she had always wanted to write, but every time she shared something she had written, someone would tell her it wasn't good enough. "Your ideas are too simple. Your words don't flow right. You should write about something else." So she stopped. For years, she carried stories inside her that never touched paper. Criticism can be helpful, but not all criticism is meant to build. Some people wield it like a weapon, a way to assert control, to make themselves feel superior. These are the voices that linger long after the words have been spoken. The ones that creep into your thoughts when you're about to take a step forward. Buddhism teaches us that words are like arrows. They can only hurt if we let them pierce our hearts. But how do we protect ourselves from arrows that come from the people closest to us? First, separate truth from projection. Sometimes people criticize not because there's something wrong with you, but because they are wrestling with their own insecurities. When Lynn finally gathered the courage to share her writing again, she realized that the loudest critic in her life had been her sister, who had once dreamed of being a writer herself. Her sister's words weren't about Lynn at all. They were about her own regret. Second, learn to respond with calm certainty. When someone says, "You should do it this way," instead of shrinking, try saying, "That's an interesting perspective, but I trust my own choices." This simple statement sets a boundary. It acknowledges their words without accepting them as truth. And sometimes the best response is silence. When the sculptor learned to keep working, ignoring the voices of passing strangers, his masterpiece finally took shape. He realized that no matter what he did, there would always be someone who thought they knew better. But it wasn't their vision he was creating, it was his own. Lynn never became a famous writer, but that wasn't the point. She began writing again, filling pages for herself, for the joy of it. Her words, once silenced, flowed freely. One evening, as the sky turned golden, I watched her trim her bonsai tree, the same patient care in her hands as she shaped it into something uniquely her own. "People will always have opinions," she said, brushing a fallen leaf from her lap. "But in the end, it's your life, your art, your story." As the night deepened and the garden grew quiet, I thought about the voices in my own life, the ones I had let in, the ones I had mistaken for truth. And I decided then and there to let them go. Because peace, real, lasting peace, is worth more than someone else's opinion. The first time I learned the true cost of helping too much, I was sitting in a small temple garden, watching an elderly monk tend to a bed of lotus flowers. The air smelled of damp earth and sandalwood, the gentle sound of a wooden bell in the distance. He moved slowly, methodically, pulling away the dead leaves, letting the healthy ones breathe. I remember asking him why he didn't help the struggling, smaller buds, why he let them work so hard just to open. He simply smiled and said, "If I open them for them, they will never bloom on their own." Some lessons in life come softly, like morning light creeping over the horizon. Others hit you like a sudden storm. And if you've ever loved someone who refuses to take responsibility for their own life, you know exactly what I mean. There's always someone who needs help. A friend who's always in crisis. A sibling who never seems to get their life together. A grown child who leans on you more than they should. At first, it feels natural to step in, to offer money, time, emotional support. After all, isn't that what good people do? But the truth is, there's a fine line between kindness and enabling. And when you cross that line too many times, you start to lose yourself. I once knew a woman, let's call her Anna. She had spent most of her life being the rock for everyone around her. Her younger brother, always in financial trouble, knew she would lend him money without question. Her best friend, constantly heartbroken, turned to her for comfort but never listened when she gave advice. Even her adult son, who had long since moved out, would call her for help with things he should have learned to handle on his own. She told herself she was being strong, that she was holding everything together. But deep down, she was exhausted. And when she finally needed someone to lean on, she realized a painful truth. No one had been holding her up. Buddhism teaches us about the law of karma, that every action has consequences, and that we must each face our own. But what happens when we keep shielding someone from their own karma? What happens when we catch them every time they fall? The answer is simple. They never learn to stand on their own. There is a story about a man who saw a butterfly struggling to break free from its cocoon. Wanting to help, he gently peeled it open, releasing the butterfly. But instead of flying, its wings were weak, underdeveloped. The struggle it had been meant to go through, the effort that would have made it strong, had been stolen from it. And so, it never truly learned to fly. Anna's moment of realization came on an ordinary evening, when her brother called her, once again asking for money. But this time, something in her snapped. She looked at her own reflection in the window, at the tired lines around her eyes, and she finally saw what had been right in front of her all along. She wasn't helping. She was preventing him from growing. That night, for the first time in years, she said no. Not angrily, not with resentment, just a simple, quiet refusal. "I love you, but I can't do this for you anymore." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then frustration, then guilt, the weight of years of obligation pressing down on her. But something else happened too, something she didn't expect. She felt lighter, because the truth is, we are not responsible for carrying other people's burdens. Of course, we should be kind. Of course, we should help when it is needed. But there is a difference between support and rescue. When we support someone, we offer guidance. We listen. We hold space. But when we rescue them, when we take on their problems as our own, we rob them of the opportunity to grow. So how do you protect yourself? Start by setting boundaries. Clear, compassionate, but firm. If someone comes to you for help, ask yourself, is this something they could do for themselves? Am I truly helping? Or am I just making it easier for them to avoid responsibility? Instead of fixing their problems, offer them the tools to fix it themselves. Instead of lending money, help them create a budget. Instead of giving endless emotional support to someone who refuses to change, encourage them to seek real solutions. Most importantly, allow people to face their own karma. It's not your job to shield them from the consequences of their choices. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to step back and let them struggle, because struggle is what makes us strong. Anna still loves her family, her friends, but she no longer carries what is not hers to bear. And when she sits in her garden now, watching the wind move through the trees, she smiles, because for the first time in a long time, she feels free. And maybe that's what real love looks like. I once heard a story about a monk who gave everything away. His food, his robes, even his last bowl of rice. He believed that generosity was a virtue, that to give was to embody kindness. But over time, something shifted. The people who once thanked him began to expect more. They stopped seeing his giving as kindness and started seeing it as duty. And one day, when he had nothing left to offer, they left him behind, searching for the next person who could fulfill their needs. There's something deeply unsettling about that, isn't there? The idea that what we give, our time, our energy, our love, can be taken for granted. That the hands we fill without question might never turn back to offer even a simple thank you. If you've ever given endlessly to someone who never seemed to notice, who only came to you when they needed something, you know this feeling well. It sits in your chest like a stone, heavy and unspoken. I knew a woman once, let's call her Maria. She had spent her entire life giving. To her family, to her friends, to anyone who needed her. She was the kind of person who never let someone walk away empty-handed. If you were hungry, she'd cook for you. If you were sad, she'd listen. If you needed money, she'd find a way to help. She did all of this without expecting anything in return. Or at least that's what she told herself. But over time, the weight of it all began to show. She would come home after long days of taking care of everyone else, only to sit in silence, exhausted. She realized that no one ever asked how she was doing. That when she was tired, no one noticed. That when she was struggling, the people she had given so much to didn't think to give back. One evening, after a particularly long day, her grandson asked her for money again. He didn't say please. He didn't look her in the eye. He simply expected. And in that moment, something inside her cracked. She gave him the money, but this time it didn't feel like kindness. Felt like obligation. And when the door shut behind him, she sat down at her kitchen table and felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She felt empty. Buddhism teaches that true generosity is giving without attachment. That kindness should flow freely, without expectation. But there is a difference between giving with an open heart and giving from a place of depletion. When we give endlessly without appreciation, when we pour from a cup that is never refilled, we don't just lose our energy, we lose our joy. Maria realized, sitting in that quiet kitchen, that she had been giving from a place of habit, not happiness. That somewhere along the way, her generosity had stopped feeling like love and started feeling like a transaction where she was the only one paying. That night, for the first time in years, she asked herself a question she had never dared to ask. Does my giving make me happy? The answer was painful. She had spent her life believing that love meant sacrifice. That to be good was to always say yes. But in that moment, she understood something she wished she had learned sooner. Giving is not meant to drain you. If the act of giving leaves you feeling resentful, exhausted, unseen, then it is not kindness. It is self-neglect. So what do you do when you find yourself in this place? When you've spent so much time being the giver that you don't know how to be anything else? First, reflect. Ask yourself, am I giving from joy or from expectation? Does this act of kindness fill me or does it empty me? If the answer is the latter, it's time to redirect your kindness. Not to stop giving entirely, but to start giving to those who appreciate it. To the people who see your efforts, who are grateful, who don't take you for granted. Maybe that means giving to a community that truly needs your help. Maybe it means spending more time with those who cherish you. Maybe it simply means learning to give to yourself for once. And finally, know when to walk away. The hardest truth to accept is that some people will never appreciate what you do for them. No matter how much you give, no matter how much of yourself you pour into them, they will always want more. And that is not your burden to carry. Maria didn't stop being generous, but she started being intentional. She began saying no to those who only saw her as a resource. She stopped giving to those who took without gratitude. And in doing so, something remarkable happened. She found joy in giving again. One afternoon, she volunteered at a community center, helping serve meals to children. When she handed a little girl a plate of food, the girl looked up, smiled brightly, and said two simple words that Maria hadn't heard in a long time. Thank you. And in that moment, she felt something she thought she had lost. She felt full, because giving real, soul-nourishing giving is not about exhausting yourself for those who don't appreciate it. It's about sharing your light with those who see it, who honor it, who reflect it back to you in their own way. So ask yourself, does my giving make me feel empty or full? And if the answer is empty, maybe, just maybe, it's time to let go. You don't have to prove your worth. You don't have to keep giving to people who take without gratitude. True generosity comes from a full heart, not an empty one. So ask yourself, does my giving make me feel full or drained? If this video made you think, even for a moment, leave a comment below and share your experience. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're ready for more clarity, more peace, and a life free from guilt, hit subscribe. Because every lesson here is designed to help you step into a life that feels lighter, freer, and truly yours. Take a deep breath, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next one.